Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Trump's envoy Keith Kellogg referred to Russia's position on NATO enlargement as a fair concern, adding that Ukraine coming into NATO is not on the table. End of quote. Now, throughout the war, Ukrainians kept fighting against Russian invasion in the hope that security guarantees from the West would prevent such atrocities in the future. Now that NATO membership is being denied to Kiev, many worry that the Trump administration is making the mistake of validating Russia's arguments that led to the war in the first place, and that it does so right before potentially crucial peace talks in Turkey. Joining us now is Andreas Umland, analyst at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, thanks for having me again.
So, first of all, would you say that this situation is basically caving into Putin's demands? Putin recently said that one of the preconditions for any talks would be to deny the option of membership in NATO not only to Ukraine, also to Moldova and Georgia. So effectively stopping the so-called NATO expansion, which we should also remind everyone is voluntary. So this is enlargement, really. But Moscow still pushes this narrative. Do you think this narrative is now being accepted in Washington as well?
I'm afraid they may be, although this is, of course, a deliberate attempt to confuse the audience. For instance, Moldova, that is mentioned in this list, has since 1994 in its constitution a neutrality clause which prevents entering any military bloc. And it also signed in 1994 a treaty with Russia about withdrawal of Russian troops from Moldova and the dissolution of the Transnistrian Republic, which is supported by Moscow. And in spite of Moldova putting this neutrality clause into its constitution, Russia has not withdrawn its troops and has not dissolved the Transnistrian pseudo-republic for more than 30 years now. So this is just one illustration, and also one wonders why it was not so important for Russia when Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia entered NATO in 2004, or when Finland doubled the NATO-Russian border with its entry of NATO in 2022-23. Then Russia did not do anything against it, and it even withdrew troops from the Finnish-Russian border during the time when Finland was acceding to NATO. And now NATO is somehow portrayed here as the main culprit in all of that. This is just a made up argument, which is for audiences that are not really interested in what is happening in Eastern Europe, and by the Russian narrative that Russian expansionism and imperialism can be explained by Western or Ukrainian provocations.
So let's make it clear, the invasion of Ukraine was never about NATO, was it? It was about Russia's territorial demands. It was about Russia hoping to control Ukraine and not being concerned about NATO's presence on its borders. However, there was also a demand that was issued before the war in Ukraine started. And this was, again, like you're suggesting, intended to obfuscate the whole thing. But Russia also said that it wants NATO to return to its 1997 borders. It doesn't want any military presence in the new NATO member states on the eastern flank. Do you think there is a risk that Russia will be bringing this up once again and probing the US administration on whether it could actually make concessions there, which would be catastrophic for the eastern flank and European security? But this is a question that one needs to ask at this stage.
Yes, indeed. And in a way, it would be only logical by Russia to do so. If now the West accepts that NATO is really the issue in Ukraine, why is it then not also an issue in the rest of Central Eastern Europe? And why does the same argument not apply to Poland, to the Baltic states, to Romania, Slovakia, and so on? If NATO is really the main issue here, then there could be a good argument be made to say, well, then let's also discuss NATO with regard to other countries.
Would the US say, okay, this is a bridge too far, we're not even discussing this?
Yes, the I guess the US would not agree to this, and the West would in general not agree to such a reversal, basically, of NATO expansion from 1994 till recently. But the logic of the suggestion that this is now something that is for Ukraine applicable, this argument then would suggest that this is actually also for other countries applicable. So this is a bizarre situation, and I'm frankly dismayed that Kellogg has made the admission that this is a legitimate argument here. Just remember when the war started with the annexation of Crimea in 2014, Ukraine was actually, by its own legislation, a neutral country, which was not trying to exceed NATO. And it only put again into its legislation the aim of accession to NATO in 2015, when it modified its law on the foundations of national security, and again put the aim of NATO accession into its legislation because of the Russian war. So the sequence is here not that there's NATO enlargement and then or the aim of NATO accession by Ukraine and then Russia attacks, but it's exactly the other way around. Russia attacks and then Ukraine puts into its legislation the aim of NATO accession.
And that is a crucial point. I'm glad that we actually cleared it up. But we're looking forward to the Istanbul talks. Do you think these could be constructive in any way, given that for the time being Russia is not making any concessions and it is receiving concessions from the US negotiators who have basically accepted one of its demands without any preconditions, it seems?
Yes, I think the only purpose of these talks for Ukraine is to show to, above all, the United States, but also to other countries that Ukraine is ready to negotiate. I don't think anything will come out of it, because the precondition for making these talks successful, namely pressure on Russia, economic pressure and military pressure on Russia, are not fulfilled. And if there's no such pressure, there's no reason for Russia to go for any concessions. They will come with their maximalist position. They will undermine international law, or will try to undermine international law, Ukrainian national sovereignty, territorial integrity. They will make their outrageous
ceasefire as well. The US has demanded a ceasefire. Ukraine said it is ready for a ceasefire. Russia keeps ignoring it.
Yes, and I'm asking myself, why is the US not reacting to this ignorance, to this purposeful ignoring by Moscow of the crucial condition for peace talks to make sense, namely that there's no shooting, no fighting, or at least no large-scale fighting during such peace talks. And Ukraine has now agreed to these to this ceasefire, although that is a concession from Ukraine, because Ukraine is occupied. Ukraine is agreeing to a ceasefire that leaves Ukrainian territory under occupation, that leaves deported children in Russian custody, if you want to call it that way, that leaves thousands of prisoners, civilian and military, and prisoners in Russia. And nevertheless, Ukraine is ready for a ceasefire, but Russia is not even agreeing to that. So it's a bizarre situation, in fact, and I think this will not change until the West will give Ukraine so many weapons and will exert so much economic pressure on Russia that Putin will have no other choice than to actually to speak seriously to Ukraine and to conduct serious negotiations.
And do you think Donald Trump will be ready to do that? He has already made it clear that he is not pleased with the way Russia is acting. He has warned about possible sanctions, but he still seems to be holding it off for the time being. Do you think that there might be a triggering event that will ultimately be, this one straw that broke the camel's back? Trump will come out and say, well, we've tried our best, But right now, Russia actually has to bear the brunt of these sanctions and feel the pressure because it has completely failed to go along with our proposals for an off-ramp.
I would hope so, that there may something be that will trigger this, but I'm skeptical. I think the main pressure that Trump is here actually experiencing is from his own society, from American society, which has sympathy for Ukraine. The support for American military support for Ukraine has actually risen in recent months, and even the Republican Party is pressuring on the White House to impose sanctions. And there's now this bill by Graham in the Senate, supported by 81 of the 100 senators. That means also by many Republicans, and that is the main factor. But there's also in the White House an anti-Ukrainian, I would even say pro-Russian faction, including people like Tucker Carlson, that are basically supporting Russian imperialism and that also have influence in the White House. And so there's an internal struggle, I think, going on now within the Republican Party, within the administration and the conservative elites of the US, which course to take. And I hope that this will be eventually in support of international law and in support of Ukraine, and that it will not be in support of Russian imperialism and undermining, for instance, of the logic of the international non-proliferation regime for nuclear weapons, which is...
One final question, because do you think enough is being done on the diplomatic front to engage with members of the MAGA movement, of the Republican Party, who are at least willing to support Ukraine, to make our voice clear here in Eastern Europe? Do you think that this is actually the opening that should be used in order to perhaps at least make our voice heard?
Yes, I think that should be tried, at least. I'm skeptical about, how much successful that will be, but perhaps there are at least some members of the MAGA movement who are sort of concerned about international law, and they also understand that it's in the national interest of the United States, although it's the most powerful country of the world. But also this power is based, for instance, on the fact that other countries in the world are not trying to acquire nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction, and they may be understanding that it's in the interest of the United States to support Ukraine and to restore Ukraine's territory and sovereignty fully. Maybe that is an argument that needs to be more actively made also by European diplomats, and also be made with representatives of the MAGA movement.
Professor Andreas Umland was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.